Oh, it looks like we're moving.
We're moving stuff around.
Oh. Hello, everyone.
Hello. That's a partner
Setup.
setup.
We are still tucked in the craft room, but we have removed some of the fabric. I have big plans to hopefully start doing this drywall. Fingers crossed. So we've been moving boxes around and things like that. This is what happens when the nights start to draw in and it feels like you have extra time. But I don't know if we actually do. Yes, the hair. I was a vampire for Halloween, so I dyed it. It is washout dye though, but it does take a while to wash out. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, we got the thing again.
You need the block under
I'm rolling to the other side of the room. But yes.
Do you want to get a block now? Not.
No, that's okay. I'll just sit still.
Okay. You sit still?
Yeah, no. But yeah, we had a Halloween party on Saturday with family and a few friends, and yeah, decided to be a vampire. So we went black, and
well, you went black.
Yes, yeah. You went as a skeleton.
Yeah,
so
I never dyed my hair.
No, you didn't.
Or cut it.
Well, I had done like the spray bottle type. Dye it black with the costume spray stuff, and I hate that stuff. So I said, I'm just going to get some washout dye. It'll eventually be gone. And hopefully that's true because it's really dark.
And hello to everybody who just came in. There's
hello.
A bunch of people. Hello, Darren and
Cindy. Bev. And Bev's on time. Very impressive. Very impressive. Not that it matters, thank you very much. It's very dark. It's not permanent, but figured why not for my costume. So I have done
you haven't dyed in a long time.
No, I used to dye my hair all the time. Sometimes I used to do like red and craziness and whatnot. And then probably for the last 5 years, I've just let it go gray. And then for Halloween, decided I'm just going to dye it rather than get the spray stuff that's so horrible, because we had the Halloween party and then we were taking the kids trick-or-treating on Sunday, so it needed to last 2 days, and I didn't want to sleep with that horrible black spray stuff in my hair, so dyed it. Mm-hmm. Hello, Outdoors with Big Matt.
Yeah, this was a funny shirt. It was one of those funny finds.
Yeah, Chris is always on the lookout. If anybody ever sees good shirts, you know who needs them. Medium or large usually work for him. Oh, big cows, I'm guessing. Right?
I'm guessing.
We're so behind on video stuff. This week has been crazy, but we hope to get caught up.
We're finally at the forced end of the garden.
Yeah, we're supposed to be -1 tonight, and then I think it's supposed to feel like -3 or something like that, which means everything's pretty much going to be done. So
that being said, we still have all the beets.
Yeah, all the beets are still.
The sugar beets all have to come out.
Yeah.
I harvested the sorghum seeds tonight, and we did some more dry bean harvesting.
We harvested some more of the dry beans.
But the garden's
and all the peppers. I must have picked. Oh gosh, I bet you it's got to be 10, 15 pounds of peppers that I took out of the garden today. We were hoping that they were going to go red, but I picked them green because they're going to be dead after tonight. So,
well, it sounds like Thorhaven decided to go with goats. We were kind of, that would have been probably our suggestion for you guys if you were thinking of adding something just because of your property, basically.
Yeah, but, a browser, not a grazer.
Yeah, because grazers, when you start adding them together, can get a little crazy.
Yeah, no, that was our thought when you were kind of joking around back and forth about the sheep and the goats, was that the sheep might have a hard time because they do need a lot of pasture. Mm-hmm. Our total
weight.
Oh,
well, we're not there yet because we still have to harvest.
Well, mostly for the fact because we didn't stick with doing shed wars, right?
Well, we're going to keep going.
So we're going to total for the whole year since we've gone this far, because we still haven't butchered chickens, rabbits. We have to do ram this weekend and geese. So we've got a bit more weight that's coming for this year's total.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know off the top of my head what the weight is as of Shed Wars time frame.
But
yeah,
it'll be interesting because I don't know. It's like there's a lot of catalysts. I guess this is like the whole thing to dive right into it to some degree, maybe. But there's a bunch of catalysts to I don't know, the whole change thing, right? And I think the tracking things, both what goes out and what you bring in,
has had a big influence.
Well, it puts it into perspective when you start looking at other things that are going on. I suppose, to put it kind of cryptic.
Well, no, I mean, what was your? I don't even know what the title was. Homesteading within your means. So this has kind of been that ongoing thing for us this year with some changes that we're making. Is basically, the overall vision for our homestead is to be sustainable, to eventually being a long ways out.
With the caveat that you'll probably never actually 100% achieve it. It's probably where we're living, not a real tangible goal to actually be 100% self-sufficient.
No. And the reason you say that is I'm watching Ivy's hunting something up there. There's so many boxes and we keep moving things around and she's like, oh, something's moved again. She's just like, what can I get into?
It's the nightly cat entertainment.
Yeah. But I think one of the things was with the tracking of the food brought in and the weights and all of the money going out and where it was going has really kind of put a few things into perspective for us. Number one, how unbelievably important the garden was, where we didn't put a whole lot of credit into that previously. That wasn't our focus. We did mostly the livestock.
Well, I think that's a big take home. I'm going to say it's almost a bit of a cliche, and how would you put it? Sorry, I'm having trouble finding the words for some of this, but it's almost a bit of a cliche that in some ways, there's some popular culture type things going around, or have been going around for a few years, where it's like a plant-based, whatever is the way to go. And
as you're wearing a bacon shirt.
No, as I'm wearing a bacon shirt. I would say there's some truth to it at the homestead level. The plant side of things is really important, unless you live somewhere that you can't grow plants. You're probably not homesteading exactly the same way. That being said, I don't think it's important without. It's not the only thing. You still need the animal side of it, but I think that's spoiler alert to probably many discussions in the future. But that's probably like the big take home message is the animals are important to the overall function of everything and what you get back from them. But if you become too animal heavy, that causes its own
upsets the balance.
And when you're looking at it from that sustainable perspective, because the more biomass of animals you have, the more you're dependent on outside sources to feed them, right? So even just from a very simple that way, which, you could go pretty far with that, but we've either lost everybody or they're intently listening to us. But I think that's a big take home from the weight side of it.
Oh yeah, I mean we've.
Well, you see the same thing. You see where you can, if we improve doing this, and we can do so much more.
Hey, Minu, how are you doing?
Hello.
I mean, basically, I think last tally total, we were over 2,800 pounds of food brought in the seasons. So, and that included eggs, and that included a couple rams and goats that we butchered at the beginning of March or April or something like that. Hey, Creekside. Long time no see or no chat. But no, it was amazing when we got going through it all, how much the garden brought in for next to no investment.
In money.
Yes.
But it's a huge investment
In
in
time.
And this is kind of that balance and going, how would you say, going like right
Hey,
down
Chad.
to the, going right down to the bare bones basics of it. It's like trying to figure out what it's all resource based, right? What time, money, and land is pretty much your resources, and it's finding that balance. And I think that's where, since we've moved, and we've had some interesting discussions on this in the last little bit, because this has kind of been an ongoing topic, but since we've moved, we've made some changes because we have more land.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, we have, I'm going to say it this way, we have less money because that land costs more than what we had before.
Yeah.
So where we were able to do certain things
and not really worry about the outgoing money, as Thorhaven's saying, you know, the concern about adding up how much you spent on the cows. At our old place, we had no mortgage, and it was one of those things that we didn't even track what was going out on feed or anything. It was just, we enjoy doing it, we're going to do it. And now at the new place, because we upsized and upscaled, and it's made life a lot easier and allowed a lot more.
And changed the dynamic.
Yeah, it's allowed a lot more scope for the imagination, so to speak, to quote Anne of Green Gables. But
Canadian reference.
Yay! I've always wanted to get Anne of Green Gables into some type of video. No. But it's kind of one of those things that it's really kind of had us zone in on what is most important to be going with and investing that money in. And it really put it into perspective when we looked at the diet of what we ate and how much certain parts made up of percentage wise, and how important it was to make sure that we had the time, the resources to do those.
And which things were easiest or least resource intensive and all that.
Yeah, or the cost to keep it running, that sort of thing. It ends up
being quite complex.
Yeah, there's been a lot of sleepless nights just going like round in circles.
You can go as far as you want with that.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to take a quick digression here and say to Creekside, technically we are, but
we've been renovating for years and it's still not done.
Yeah, we haven't actually really touched.
We moved. Yeah, this used to be. I used to have the fabric all along behind us, and I've taken it down and packed it away because my goal is to finish. Basically, when we moved in and we started going, it was going to get finished and time got away from us and we started living in the space. And then it's just been procrastination after procrastination, because now that we live in the space, you have to move to do the job. Mm-hmm. So I've started to pack everything back up and I am going. I have the tools. I have the rest of the mud. I'm going to get it done. That's my goal.
That's the plan.
I hope everybody in here holds me to this.
But no sort of time frame, because it may...
Well, I'd like to have it done by the end of March, by my birthday. Before we get into busy season again, I am going to have this. This room it's 24 by 20, I think, overall size, and the ceiling, everything has to be done. So it's going to be a fun little project. But now that the wood stoves are going, I think it will probably go quite quickly. Mm-hmm. Hey, Crucy.
I was going to say hello, Projects with Paul.
Oh, and hello.
Thank you guys for coming in.
Yes.
And yes, the sleepless nights. It's kind of one of those things. It's like, in some ways, I'm going to go back to what Darren said. You don't want to know. And then once you do know, you're thinking about it, because it's like, how do we...
And the worst bit is there's some stuff that you really enjoy it. And when you start picking it apart, it really kind of takes the wind out of the sail sort of thing. And then you're back in that, okay, it's got to go. And then, but I enjoy it, so I want it to stay. And it's kind of just that.
That's where you have to find the balance, right? Which is, I guess, what we meant by the living within your means, of finding that balance, because maybe that's, that age-old discussion, and this is another point that they all feed into each other, but it's like the labels, so to speak, right? And I'm going to put this out there because this is kind of
okay. Go for it. You go for it.
It's those labels, right? Homesteader, farmer, hobby farmer. I think when you actually tunnel into it, and it's not super linear and dry, cut and dry, that this is how it is. But I think really, if you were trying to put them to some degree into silos, I would say when you're farming, whatever you're doing with the purpose of a business. It's a business. When you're hobby farming, it doesn't matter how much money you throw at it, because you potentially have
money to burn,
limitless resource, essentially, right? But when you're homesteading, you really are trying to feed yourself is the principal one, but you're trying to do it in the
most sustainable manner that you can do,
and most efficient, right, within your resources. And that would probably be where I would say it's the silos. But that being said, you have tons of overlap with that, and you can branch out. Now, I do think when you're talking about modern homesteading, and this is an opinion, so I'm going to share it and take it for its worth. I think it's harder to take things from an actual homestead level to the business model. That's just my opinion. And I've got some reasons why I think that.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not
yeah, it's not, well, it's not that it's terrible. It's just one of those, it's kind of one of those things where you know the right answer, but you're trying to find
it's nice
holes.
When you actually, it's nice when you have the information.
Yeah.
Because you can pick anything. You've never raised chickens before. You want to start with chickens and what have you. You can sort of track it and see. You have the experience of how it works as far as your time and your interest level and your like and your dislike. That's, I'm not going to say it's easy, but that's the stuff that it's not necessarily all quantifiable. It needs time, right? But then when you track the other bits of it, like, well, how much did we get from it, and how much did it cost us, and all those things, keeping in mind that a lot of things don't work in a nice, what do you call that, like fiscal year, a 1 year type scenario. I know I'm not talking in homesteading terms, but it can put a different perspective on some of it. Okay.
Sure.
It's not all sunshine and rainbows.
No, that part is true. And I think we've just had, and we've kind of been ongoing with this for a couple months now, with the, trying to figure out the balance, figure out where the money is best spent, all those sorts of things. I know nobody likes to really talk about money. It's one of those, no, money's not it.
It's resources.
Yeah, exactly. So, but basically, I mean, we've kind of gone through things and chose out what's staying and what's not staying on the farm, basically. We basically decided the pigs are going. We are going to get rid of them. It is just not in our sustainability plan to actually be able to feed them and maintain them for
well, there's a lot of reasons for it.
Exactly.
That being said, the coonies are probably if you want to breed pigs, which would be part of the sustainable part. If you want to breed pigs, they are by far the best.
They're definitely nothing against the pigs themselves. It's just, as we sit down and go through our plan, one of the main things for us was to never have something on our property that we had to go through the process of selling, or essentially make a business out of it.
And I think to explain that a little bit further, and we're going to do a video on this too, so everybody in here is getting kind of a sneak peek. But we're going to go through it maybe in a little bit more detail at some point. But what we mean by that, I guess, is it's always good on a homestead scale to have that mindset of, like, you could generate some income. And our chickens and rabbits and things are a great example. We can always sell some, and that's the advantage to keeping the purebreds, because they kind of keep their value, right? But in a given year, if we had to, anything that they produce for us, we can just consume ourselves. We don't have that
that you have to move them.
That extra that breaks you.
Yeah.
Let's put it that
Which
way.
was the dilemma with the pigs. Is like right now we have 10 piglets and we can't consume them all. And
well, sorry, we can. This is the other qualifier. The pigs are great if they're your only endeavor. If all you were going if you were going to build a homestead around raising pigs, and that's your large livestock, then it's far easier to do it well. And the feed stuff aside, feed's another matter. But you could consume it. But when you add layers to it, then it kind of, and this is where for us we're very much going. The sheep are the ones that.
Well, that's our main source. Well, you often say that really when planning out a homestead, it's nice to kind of aim for only one grazer.
Or one main.
Your one main grazer. Where for us, the pigs and the sheep compete for the same pasture space, the same
barn space,
everything. So that it just, the pigs were upsetting the balance of our homestead, basically, and causing added stress, that sort of thing. But
what means street?
Now, I was going to just say one thing too. While Angie was still in here, me and New Acres, send me an email in regards to Plowman's backyard. So if you, I think our email is on the, or maybe you already have our email. I'm not sure. But anyways, I had mentioned to her, but you're in our live, so I will mention it to you. If you want to send me an email, we can sort out your visit.
Yep, and I'm going to take that opportunity to look at to go back to Chrissy's comment. Yeah, squirrels can be a bit problematic. I don't know that I actually don't know the answer to this because we've not had.
Yeah, we just talked about squirrels in Creekside Maples live. If anybody's not subscribed to Creekside Maples, you need to subscribe to him and then make sure you're in his Tuesday night live before us because you will learn an amazing amount of stuff. But squirrels are terrible animals.
Yes, they cause more power outages than anything else. Which totally makes sense. But I don't know that sometimes the squirrels and stuff are actually digging up your ground to eat it, but they're more digging it up to see what it is. Right?
And then it ends up dying. Sorry,
and then they kill it. But hopefully they don't keep doing that on you. But I am actually also going to go through Cindy's comment because I think we say this, and this is I think the hard part with some of it because, and don't get me wrong, we're not sitting here today talking about this like this is brand new, we just learned it, whatever. It's just now we've gone through the experiment, we have the concrete numbers, this, that, and whatever, we can extrapolate those and kind of make a decision because like Cindy's saying, exactly what she said, when you're in a farming business, that's the one business you're allowed to leave money in Canada. Right? Because it's essentially has to happen. So you don't actually want to be making money, exactly like what Cindy said. But when you're homesteading, it's all about saving money. Yeah. The more money you can, and I don't mean that as in like nickel and diming yourself, but it's looking at the bigger picture saving money. It's like if I have 10 different kinds of livestock, do I need it? Do I like having it? Like, because there is that side of it too. Do I like having it all? And what cost is that to do it? Because that's something with the pigs, for example, we've worked it out. You could have a very fixed cost of just pellet feeding them, but then that kind of defeats some of the purpose, which is another downside. Even the coonies still require a fair bit of input. Chickens do too.
Oh yeah.
But it's like a unit thing, right? One pig eats a heck of a lot more than a chicken does. So,
well, and the thing is, what we've kind of said with the chickens, the rabbits, the sheep are a little bit different, but all the smaller stuff you can float that because the most it's going to ever kind of run you is, well, for us it's it's about $1,200, $1,200 a year to feed our chicken flock and grow outs or our rabbit herd and grow out. So, that's something that if you have to absorb that, it's a loss, it's a loss. But with the pigs, because of the exponential, well, not exponential, but you go from 4 to 30, and then, you really can't gauge how much your expense level is going to be for that year, or how much feed you're going to need. I mean, as we're going through stuff, as who knows what's coming, all those things.
You basically have a greater potential, and this is very different from raising wieners. Having 2 wieners, raising them out in a fixed amount of time, with a relatively fixed purchase cost, and even though feed prices go up, you have a pretty good idea of how much feed it's going to cost to get them to the butcher, notwithstanding all the butcher stuff, because that's a whole other matter. That's not such a big deal, but then at the same time, it's not completely sustainable because you're always dependent on getting it from somebody. That's the fundamental problem with meat, dairy, and eggs. No matter how you do it, somebody always has to breed it. And I think that's the one thing that it's good to keep in the back of your mind. Yeah. Somebody had to breed it to make that happen. And so somebody's had those costs and this, that, and whatever, which goes into a much bigger discussion about, what would you call that? There's the YouTube community that I think everybody in here, there's nothing but good things to say about it. But then there's your local community. And I'm not even going to say the local, but just the reality of where you live. Let's just put it that way. Because obviously we have people literally from all over the place right now. There's only 8 of us in here. And we're spread all over. Very, very spread out. Which is great. But the local culture, I'm going to call it local for lack of a better term, that local culture affects you unless you can do something independently. I.e., you can have a flock of 30 chickens and a couple of roosters and hypothetically keep that going forever genetically, pretty much independently of what anybody around you does. The only input you then have is feed. Versus the pigs, to do the same thing with pigs, you're talking multiple boars, multiple sows. It's like cows. It's very hard, right? Like you can't have a whole bunch of bulls. So you end up being dependent on either purchasing them or borrowing them from somebody or doing AI, which a lot of those things are not things you can do yourself.
And in case anybody doesn't 100% follow our channel, you should know that we are very much one of those. We want to be dependent on ourselves and
reducing the cost and reducing the dependency at the same time.
We want to be able to say it doesn't matter what other people do because we're okay. That's the mentality because we raise rare breeds, and it is a.
But it doesn't matter if they're rare.
Well, it doesn't. It doesn't. It's just that thing of not being dependent on somebody to provide you with your stock.
Because this is something we've actually gone through, and I'm going to assume everybody's still in here, so everybody's interested in this. But you can stop me at any point, or stop us, I should say. But we've gone through an exercise with the pigs because this is the thing. I'm sure nobody in here can say you could not have too much bacon, right? That I'm going to say it. Bacon is really the principal driver between raising pigs. That and the fact that a pig of any breed produces a large volume of meat because they're very dense animals. And that's another downside too, from a homestead perspective. They're single purpose.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go into that too much because that's a whole other discussion. All these things spoke into all sorts of discussions, but I do think the longer we've done it, when something is single purpose, it becomes much harder to justify it in that truly sustainable manner because you only have, I'm going to say it, you only have one metric or one thing that you can offset its costs, time, energy, money, all that sort of stuff, right? Whereas when you have multiple things produced by it, you actually have, it's like picking on the sheep when you've got meat, fleece, the fiber, and you're doing something with the fiber. That's what the key thing. You still always have to do something with it, and potentially milk. That's 3 things that you can offset your time
and manure and fertilizer.
Well, you get that from everything, technically. Except but yes, it's harder to use it. Yeah, but yeah, it's. I'm just Raven's not a fan of bacon.
No, yeah.
No, you're not a fan of bacon at all.
You didn't smoke all that beautiful bacon.
And I think that's the thing for us with the pigs. Like, there's really no substitute for
Hey,
milk.
Majias Rescue Ranch. I hope I said that right. I know we went through this before. I'm
Yes,
terrible.
it is.
It's Majias, right? Did I say it right?
So.
I think so.
You don't milk their pigs. Well, to be honest, not seriously, but the thought did cross her mind. But
to try just to see, but no,
they would let you. But
not necessarily to try it to taste, but just to try it to see if they would let you even do it. But no.
But it is true, right? If you have more uses, more end uses, more end products, that helps you justify it at the homestead scale. And that's probably the principle of why the old time, and I keep saying homestead, but that mixed species, small scale farm where everybody had a cow or two, a couple of chickens, some geese, some ducks, a couple pigs, that classic old McDonald's farm. That's also based on an era when everybody had it. And that's the other part about, I think, the big difference in being sustainable in a modern homestead is, even though there's, she said, watch the video on that.
I could still potentially try and make that video.
It might be interesting, but yeah, that model works really well for all that diversity when you don't have to be the sole custodian of it. And what I mean by that is, you can have one rooster and a couple chickens, like 5 chickens, and they'll produce you enough eggs and whatever. And when you need a new rooster, you walk to the neighbor and you eventually swap a rooster. And that's not necessarily the case anymore. And part of that's because we have so much potential diversity in animals. I'm going to keep this to livestock because plants are the same thing, but it's a little different. But you have so much diversity that everybody does something different, which is completely valid and completely makes sense. But that kind of makes us all our own little islands of.
We all have to be able to exist in our bubble.
Somewhat. But yes, so that's a really good point, Rambling with the Buddies, because I think that's where some of it, because you've got an excellent point. It's like using I'm going to say using the Vision Acres example. They are in an area that they're allowed to sell the milk.
Yeah,
they are, and we've watched their comments. I'm just kind of, you brought it up, and it's a really good example because it's another way to look at it. But they live in an area where they can sell the milk. That opens up a huge possibility for them, right? Because sustainable to them could be completely different, because obviously they're not on a big acre. They're not going to become an actual commercial scale supplier of milk. That's a whole different thing. But they can do something that we can't.
Well, it's the same as what you say about the guy that we were talking about.
Joe Salatin.
Yeah,
right.
And his model works because he can butcher it at his house and sell it where we can't do that. And that totally changes, because as soon as you take that pork, I can raise out the pork. We calculated out the coonies. I can raise that meat for my own personal consumption for $1.50 a pound.
Now quantify that, because there's a bunch to that. There's a bunch of things to that.
Well, do you want to quantify it after, or you want to quantify it now? Because I'll let you quantify it.
Well,
$1.50 a pound. That's basing it on we do it. You're talking about what we feed, or
is that just the cost of feeding the piglet the butcher weight, or is that also helping cover some of the cost of the adults?
No, that's how much feed goes into that animal to get it from 0 to 120 pound hanging weight. It costs. Now you screwed me up, because what did I say?
$1 or something.
Sorry, yes, it's $1.50 a pound, but
at
for
current
us
feed prices.
At current feed prices. But to then take that and get it butchered adds $2.70 a pound.
Not including the gas and stuff.
That's just talking about butchering our animals. So that 120 pounds now has cost me, oh gosh, I got to add quickly, $4.10 a pound just to get it packaged to then sell. And you've got to turn around and say, oh, well, I can't sell it for $5 a pound. That's absolutely ludicrous. Why would I put all that time and effort in that I haven't budgeted?
Well, and you also have the other side of it. And as you scale up, you end up, it's like any farm, right? If you're a dairy farm and you're commercially producing milk, you're producing your own replacement stock because you're not going to go out and buy that. So as soon as you add that onto it, like with the pigs, you're looking at keeping multiple boars and multiple sows for multiple genetics. Or the other option is you're dependent solely on everybody around you.
Hey, Red in the Valley.
Hello, to get that from, right? And this is the other thing with the pigs for us at the homestead scale. 2 seconds, and I go back to a comment that kind of feeds into this, which is really an interesting one, I think. My brain's going a mile a minute right now. But this is the one thing too with the kunis, right? You usually kind of get like a 4, you'd be lucky maybe 5 years. So we could keep like one sow and boar and have piglets, but we'll always have that.
We have to go buy another one.
Yes, and then you don't have the ability to.
Really... And the downfall is in the kuni world, to go buy another one is $1,000. Even if you keep your own sow, your own gilts, and just buy the boar, you're still $1,000, which is added to the cost of raising that animal, which makes your meat cost even more.
Well, and you also
it just escalates.
You also have the other part too about is homesteading all about just what works for us, because there's a lot of breeds of animals that have disappeared because people stopped using them in the homestead scale, and they were perfectly adapted for it. Yeah. So that's the other part about doing it well, is if you only have one sow, you can't really do any selection. Your 50% of your selection pressure is going to be based on what other people are doing.
It doesn't allow you to improve your
herd. Which, if everybody's doing the same thing, it makes sense. But if the markets are not going that way, it's yeah.
So I'm curious, Scott. You said there that you're told that it's possibly changing. So what have you heard? That's interesting. Also, Thorhaven, I'm surprised on the honey. I am surprised that you can't do honey.
Here too,
another interesting fact, and I will just say this because it is something that I have been questioned on at things before. You actually can't make and sell soap, even.
At least not here.
And not in Ontario. I don't know about Quebec. Quebec may be different, but you cannot make and sell soap, and it's even there's something about when you put the milk product in, it has to be a dried milk product that's been.
Now I'm going to go back for a second because I don't want anybody to think that we're just getting up here and complaining, because that's. Oh
no, it's just sharing we find it very fascinating,
because if you're this is totally looking at it from, because Rambling with the Bruns is a big point. It's like, $4 for pig butchered, that's way too much. Keep in mind, I'm going to say it this way, and it's not the proper way. That's the industry talking, right? Once things become, we were in North Shore. I'm not going to go into it. We were in North Shore Preparedness Live. Who may be in here, I don't know, but the other night, and he had some really interesting topics about, like, how do I put it? I don't know how to put it exactly, but anyways, what other people do around you affects you, whether you want it to or believe it does or not.
Yeah.
So once you start getting into like that kind of thing, which is where we're going, if you're doing it just from a homesteading perspective, if you can be as much in control of it as you possibly can, you have enough of that animal to, like we say it all the time with our chickens. Other people had trouble getting chickens, getting chicks. It didn't last forever, but there was a period there. And because of the way we do the chickens, we were completely insulated from it. It didn't affect us at all. Now, getting feed is a different story, but if you can take those little pieces out and just kind of have that little bit of a control over those supply chains, for lack of a better way to put it, if your supply chain is you're dependent on getting, the wiener pig or the broiler chickens from a feed store or a company that you order them from, what happens to them affects you. If your supply chain is going out to the back chicken coop to get your chicks because they just hatched out a bunch of chickens, that's very different, right? You've got some control over that and some predictability long term.
I was going to go back to Scott was saying about the 400 pound, which was what you were talking about, and that was our thing. Is when it's coming to that point of when we get it butchered, it's coming close to that or over that. There's no way it makes sense to lose money and your time on a product. But the other thing was Thorhaven excellence. You fed big pigs for very little investment. And that's the one thing we said with the Coonies. If we just wanted them for ourselves, $1.60 a pound is dirt cheap for meat. But the problem is we can't eat all of it. And that makes it
not without changing the dynamic.
Yeah, and then, you know, because we don't want to give up the other things to make pork our primary product.
It kind of goes down the line of we can do like the sheep, and this is something about there's a flip, I think there's a flip side to animals that have litters versus animals that have lower numbers of babies.
Mm-hmm.
Because and I'm going to take poultry out of it because poultry usually are kind of in a very quick cycle, and generally speaking, even though they eat a lot, they don't eat as much as mammals.
Yeah,
they're a little different. You could argue that, but I think they're a little different. But it's like a sheep. The most you're going to get out of you is 2 lambs, right? So to keep genetic diversity,
maybe 3, but we're not hoping for that.
Yeah, we don't want 3 because that's just harder. But on us, but let's say you're going to get 2, and you're not going to get 2 out of them all. A lot of them are going to give you 1, which is still fine. That's awesome. So the most they're going to do is double themselves. So you can physically hold on to more individual units, if you will, of a bigger genetic diversity, because they're not going to produce you so many animals that you can't. It's kind of like what you're saying, that you couldn't use. But if we do that with pigs, and rabbits are the same, but it's a little different because they're smaller. But you've got the issue of you can't keep that diversity that allows yourself to keep going, because that diversity will eat you out of house and home, for lack of a better way to put it, and produce you. Actually, at that point, it will produce you more. So it's very different from having a pair of pigs to having 4 sows or more to actually do that meaningful selection.
And we've worked it out, and basically, for someone to keep a pair of pigs and use them for breeding, sell off a few weaners, that sort of thing, it works fantastic. The Coonies are an amazing model, an amazing pig for that type of enterprise, for lack of a better word. But for us and our odd, strange, however you want to word it, desire to be genetically independent and not have to worry about what other people are doing or what's available, the pigs just aren't that feasible to do it that way.
That comes from things in the past, though, where you get to a point where you can't get something. We've had points with various livestock where you need another male or you need another female line, and you can't get it. It's not there. So that's no different than what I was saying about the chickens, right? We set ourselves up, and now we don't have. That's one less thing we have to worry about, and that's where I stay up. That's where I get stressed out, because I'm thinking it's like the pig. We could keep replacement sows and get a new boar, but we're going to have to figure that out in 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's. I'm going to go up to. I'm going to go back a bit because there's some good stuff in here.
I'm going to address. There's been a few people say about the hair. The hair is not permanent. I dyed it for Halloween. I was a vampire, and because we had a party on Saturday and we were going trick-or-treating with the kids on Sunday, I wanted it to be something that wasn't going to mess up my pillow at night. So I actually did a washout dye. So it'll be here for a month or 2 maybe, but it's not permanent, but I do kind of like it. Like, especially on camera. It doesn't look as nice in person as it looks on camera.
That's good.
Yeah.
Your hair looks better than my hair. It usually does. I'm going back to Sweeney Creek's comment about the permitting and stuff. Like, I guess where I'm going with this, or where we're kind of going with this, we're not knocking that at all, because it makes it. There are legitimate reasons when you start scaling something up of why these things exist. Totally get that, but you do have a limbo zone where you're not big enough to really be a player often, but you're bigger than just, I don't know, a backyard. Like when you actually start looking, going back to the weights, when you actually start looking at how much you need to feed a human, you're into a whole different caliber of growing, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, right? So you're more than just a casual whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know how to put that better, but
the I don't know. It's you want to do a little bit more than just for yourself, but you're not. Well, we talked about this today or yesterday, where you kind of have a cap. You don't want to grow like exponentially. You just want you have an idea of what you need to bring in. Let's say you had no mortgage, your animals were feeding yourself, and you were able to grow 90% of what your animals needed. So you're going to have to buy minerals, things like that you can't produce, wormers, all that sort of stuff. And you are going to have to pay taxes and hydro if you have it, that sort of thing. So anyways, where I'm going with this is you rather than, this is our vision anyways, we're not out to make money at it. We just need to figure out a way to make it that it would sustain itself to cover the cost of those things. And then you cap it so you kind of have a limited availability of things and you can move that. This is where those people get punished by all the permitting that goes on.
Yeah.
Because you can't do that because you've got to go through this or that.
There's some other interesting points, Red in the Valley and Scott. They're different points, but you both touched on some stuff about changing. Like, I'm not going to go down this road too much. I'm not into fear mongering or any of that sort of stuff. There's only 9 of us in here, so I mean, you're watching what you're watching right now. But stuff's not the same as it was a few years ago, and it's not going to stay the same as it was a few years ago because basically people are going to start feeling that crunch.
Yeah,
and that's part of this exercise. Is I'm going to say it. Maybe it's like us seeing the writing on the wall before it happens. To some degree, we're kind of in the middle of it, I guess, but it's maybe that cautionary thought to like, give this stuff some thought if you're doing some of this, because there's always that, and this goes into the whole, I'm going to say it this way, and hopefully it doesn't offend anybody, but the prepper, some of the prepper control type discussions that happen, right? Whether government or whatever.
Yeah,
just gonna leave it at that because it's not exactly the same. But you've always got somebody, like what Scott said about selling dead cows.
Yeah,
you've always got somebody that's going to do that stuff. As bad as that sounds, there's no common sense to that whatsoever. But you've always got somebody out there that's going to take advantage of a situation like that. Like that's the reality, and that's why these things that kind of make it difficult to upscale.
What does that do? Sorry.
What?
Well, Red in the Valley was saying she can't hear you very well. I don't know if you can.
I could be talking.
You're getting quiet. Worked up. And
sometimes I get right away from it. I'll lean forward a bit, but you've always got somebody that will take advantage of those sort of real negative situations because there's money involved, and I think. This goes hand in hand with our ideology. There's a very different thing from being able to potentially generate a little bit of income, but not having to, versus you have to, or that could result in the failure of your enterprise, your homestead. And I think that's probably the simplest way to put it. Our changes, for lack of a better way of putting it, even though we don't necessarily like them all, are really to try to curb that as much as we can. So that I'm going to pick on like the horse, for example. The horse does nothing. But the horse, for us, not for everybody, having one horse doesn't break the bank. Trying to do the pigs well
could break the bank.
We'll just put it that way. And
that's because in a way the horse is a fixed cost. There is no change. Year to year, we know exactly how much he's going to cost. The pigs, it fluctuates so much with piglets and feed and everything else.
And that's breeding pigs to try to be sustainable so that you're not reliant on always finding something. Yeah. So I could go a little bit further with it. I have some ideologies on how sustainable means a lot of things. How sustainable do you want to be, and what may be the best options for that. But I probably won't get into that right now.
Before I forget, I was going to go back to Red in the Valley. I've never tried to make clothing knit, like the sweaters. I've done hats, mittens, that sort of thing. It would depend on the date that you would need it for, because it would be the perfect excuse for me to try and make an Afghan, because I've always wanted to crochet an Afghan and I just never find the time. And I'm getting really good at crocheting and I'm actually quite quick at it. So potentially send me an email and we'll talk about that, because I would love an excuse to try and make an Afghan. And we could talk about it a little bit. But
and that's a really good segue into another thing that I think is kind of important. It's looking at those things that are less perishable. Like, not necessarily saying sheep are going to work for everybody. I'm not saying that at all. But in our situation, like the fleece, right? It's something that outside of getting it off the animal, that's kind of like time sensitive. But middle of June, she said.
That's loads of time. Loads of time. I can do something.
But
send me an email.
Outside of getting,
or I think I have your email. I can send you something. Sorry, I'm interrupting.
Outside of getting,
I was networking. I'm going to get back into my craft business yet. Good. You watch. And I do want to start painting again, but I'm not going to paint you.
But right now. But the fleece is a great example of it's not perishable. It is. If you try to keep it forever, it's probably not. You don't store it properly.
If you don't store it properly,
but it's not the same, right? And I think that's part of the difference. Like the chicken example, it's perishable, but like we were joking about it with chickens or geese, it doesn't matter. Butchering 20, 30, 50, 100 of them even isn't really it's a lot.
100 of them would be a little excessive.
But a family of 4 can consume that. And if you're looking at kind of the living within your means, also includes like what do you actually need? Because we're going off that statistic that a family of 4 would likely consume like 800 pounds of meat. So when we start looking at that, you could produce that just with the pigs and not have the rest of it, but then you don't have the diversity. Mm-hmm. Or, okay, you break it down better. So there's 100 to 125 pounds of eggs, and
you're talking
like what we're up to.
But sorry, anyway, I'm planning my baby quilt. I'm my baby crochet. I'm planning. Sorry. So what information would you like?
Well, if you get to the producing your own food and a family of 4. How much meat would you need to produce?
Thanks for coming in, Thoriman.
Yeah, thank you. We'll catch you later.
Well, you in theory, it's 196, I think, is what pounds per person is what the average American, of course, because you can't find Canadian statistics, eats. So
190. So we rounded it up.
We said 800 pounds for a family of 4, just to be on the safe side, because
Mm-hmm. So if you break it down, you're 100. This is what that would be broken up into a couple of different things. Like how you get to that?
Yeah, because
right? You've got 100 pounds of eggs produced by our flock of chickens.
250 pounds was minimum was the sheep.
Mm-hmm. In
meat.
We didn't.
And then you had 160 pounds of chicken, because we were saying that you were going to butcher 40 chickens we were on the small side, even though most of the time they're between 5 and 6 pounds. We said, because we're now talking about maybe butchering some a little earlier because we have a lot of chickens. It'd be I based it on 4 pounds basically, but you could probably base it on 5 and say 200 pounds of chicken. The rabbits are about the same amount, and then the geese. So
what are we up to with that? We've done this a couple of times. I can't remember the number.
I should have brought my book.
Hello, honey badgers.
So this year we've done 120 pounds of eggs, and then if you did you're 650 plus whatever the geese would be. Now this year we're very short on geese because we only have 5 to butcher, so obviously we're not getting that extra 150 pounds out of geese. But
that's where it ends up. You're very well on your way to producing that.
Mm-hmm. And the one thing we did learn this year is that we actually can consume less meat. When the garden is producing, we ate a lot of vegetarian style meals, just because it was convenient. It was fast. I hadn't taken the meat out of the freezer. So yeah, I think it is kind of that thing of not having more on your homestead than you actually need, because if a homestead's going to run efficiently and not break the bank, You need to really figure out how much you're going to consume and grow what you need.
Mhm.
That's all. It doesn't mean you can't have diversity. It's just for Chris and I, the way we kind of operate with having the quantity of animals of each species that we do, we produce a lot of each animal. I mean, we butcher, 10 sheep a year or 10 lambs, and this year we have like 80 chickens, but we are not doing 80 chickens again. We're not doing that again. No, we're not doing that again. But anyways, the basic kind of point of it is that what Chris titled this with the homesteading within your means is figure out what you need, figure out how much you can afford to spend, and figure out the best way to get what you need in that budget. Because that's where we slipped up. We were already kind of there, and then we thought, let's do pigs and add that to the
slip up. But the other part to that too is not everything is always as advertised.
Yeah,
like that's the one thing, and maybe others see this, but it's like when we talk about stuff, we talk about the negative sometimes more than we talk about the positive.
I don't think this is something that we talked about. I think it's very important to not sugarcoat things for people when they're thinking about getting into stuff. That is important. It is reality. You can't afford to keep losing money on it. You can't. Mm-hmm. And the pigs were not losing money at this point, but as we look into getting into them the way we would any other animal that we have, it will be a bottomless money pit. And it would have to become a business where you went out and sold that product. And that's not something that either of us enjoy. I don't mind selling my craft stuff because it is, I always get the word wrong. It doesn't expire.
It's not perishable.
It's non-perishable. So I can putter along. I can make 4 or 5 pairs of mittens a year, and I can go 2 years without selling anything until I have enough to actually warrant going to a sale. You can't do that if you're raising pigs and they're costing you $8,000 a year, and you need to make that money back every year.
Unless that's all. Yeah. Unless you're. The big lesson is also knowing, do you want to take it to a. Do you want to take something to a business level?
Mm-hmm.
And if you do,
then it's great.
That's great. If you don't,
it's just not in our.
If you don't, plan. Or you're kind of not sure, that's where you may not want to jump too far into it, I guess. But that's a good point, Red in the Valley. It's
you're trapped as soon as you're.
You are. It really doesn't matter.
No,
I'm gonna say this. My opinion, for what little it's worth. Everybody knows what you've got. If you go to the feed store, they have a fair idea.
Yeah.
Does it really matter? Probably not most of the time. But, like you say, what you have to go through to get 13 chicks sometimes feels a little whatever. Not the better way to put it. And there is some really funny things about, like, when you produce, there's a lot of things. When you produce it all on your own farm and you don't sell it, and you don't, like the pigs are a great example. You butcher them all yourself and this, that, and whatever. Basically, it's like, you don't care. That's kind of the official stance. But then it's figuring out how to make that work.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever it is.
And the problem was you can't consume it all, so you have to have an outlet to get rid of it. That's the problem with that.
Well, and it's all to liability. It's like them coming to check your property out, like you said, there in the valley. It goes back to the same problem as somebody trying to sell a dead cow. Mm-hmm. It's just, it doesn't always feel like that liability. But I'm not going to get into that. But
So Angie's gonna
do some planning.
You're gonna go home, and Mike's gonna be like, "You're never allowed to go there again, ever." That's what it'll be. You can come see the craziness. Hello, Celtic Roots. How are you doing?
How are you guys? I know how you're doing because you're so sick.
Yes. Hey, Caitlin's family farmstead. How are you guys?
You guys are both kind of coming right into the middle of a bit of a deeper.
Well, I think it's somewhat wrapped up. We can lighten the mood now, although we can also continue talking about it. But it is the basic gist of it is we've decided to not continue with raising the Coonies. we've been talking about this quite a bit. We probably will do some sort of wrap up video once the process is all finished. And it just is not the animal's fault. It's not anything. It's just, it doesn't work in the vision that we have for the homestead. I think that's the main thing.
Well, and that's another part too, right? Which I'm sure most people in here right now can totally relate to, is like, you want to know what your goals are, right? I keep getting Facebook things. You want to know what your goals are and why you have it, because one of the big things for us was one, you do the pork was bacon.
Yeah.
But there was an ethical side to it too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you try it. Hello. You try it, and I think, who was watching? I forget who it was. We were talking to somebody's live in the not so distant past, and they were talking about, it was Bland's, and they were saying about if it's not working, you don't have to continue with it per se. Not that that's always.
It's not a failure. It's just a learning thing, and it doesn't mean that it won't work for somebody else. It just doesn't fit in.
That being said, you probably and we probably look really bad because we started YouTube, did a bunch of changes after our move, got into and got out of some things relatively quickly, but you don't see the history.
Well, the one thing that we said was, and this is something I think that comes with homesteading for a long time. I mean, between us, we've got 14, 13 years, of raising various animals, gardening, that sort of thing. Not all of it together, but it is kind of one of those things that very quickly we've learned to recognize when things aren't working the way they, you have a vision, you have a goal in mind, and it's no different than trying 10 different types of watermelon to find the one that you like.
I'm going to add to that, because we were talking about this with the chickens. I keep going back to the chickens, but there's that feeling when something feels, it's always work. This would be the thing, right? If you're going from the prepping perspective for a moment into homesteading, which kind of is the basis of homesteading in a way, it's all work. All of it's work. It all takes work. It all takes time. It all takes energy. It all takes resources. 100% work. But
it keeps us happy, healthy, and young forever.
That's debatable. But
you say always be positive.
I get the positive part. You will find, and it doesn't always happen, like, because I said, you say the longer you do it, the more you see it, but there are some things that just run well with what feels like very little effort. Those are the things that are great. Because usually when you start analyzing them, you go, yeah, now I see why it's working that way. It's not that you don't put thought into it. It's not that you don't have to do the work. It's not that you don't. But when something starts to get hard to justify, rationalize, physically get, all of those kind of things, you kind of end up in a situation where it's like, all right, we're either pouring more effort, whatever that effort is, into it to make it work, because sometimes you can get over the hump. Or is it worth putting more effort into this to make it work? I.e., it's like a risk assessment, right? Because you kind of want to do that with a homestead, because if you're basically trying to do it to feed yourself and not a business, business, you should still be looking at a risk assessment. Like, you have a principal goal. If it's not, if it's going to be risky to get to that goal, you may not want to do it.
Well, and the other thing that we kind of gauge things on with everything, whether it's plants, animals, whatever, is look at the worst feature that you can find about something. And if you can see and look at that.
If the pros outweigh the worst feature.
Yeah, and still go, it doesn't matter because it's worth it. Then it's there. You're there. You've got just what you needed. And that's the thing for us. Sometimes you get that temptation, and there's nothing wrong with it, to try something new, because it may fit the bill. But sometimes it doesn't, and it's not a failure. It's just recognizing it and moving on.
Once, and I'm glad that Reading the Valley embraces the conversation. But that's a good point too from Celtic roots, and I know Joe Salvi. I've read some of his books and stuff. I think it's true. I also think it's hard on the homestead scale because you're trying to get to an immediate reward sooner because the point is to feed yourself, and for most of us, not everybody. So getting to, I think that's where, I don't even know if it's framed as taking on too much and getting burnout and it's not whatever. And I'm also going to quantify that's not what's going on here because we're still talking about doing everything else at fairly high levels, including like, what did we figure? The garden was going to like triple in size.
Yes, but that's a video to come.
That's a whole other thing. But it was assessing. It's not even in that case necessarily figuring out mastering something because there's a lot of garden type stuff that we are not masters of. There's other things that I would say we're pretty darn good at, maybe not masters, but pretty darn good at. But there's a lot of things that we can totally improve on. However, we're going to keep going forward with it because essentially that plant matter that you can produce ends up being the biggest part of your diet. Mm-hmm. To be quite frank about
it. And it's the biggest savings. That's the one thing that really eye-opened for us this year was the garden has saved us so much money. And yes, we're seeing meat prices climb, and we're glad that we have that.
And it's all climbing.
That's another one where we noticed an extreme expense this year because this is our first year in a long time of not having any milk produced on the farm, our homestead, and that was where we noticed we spend a lot on dairy.
Well, so and that's where if you want the product, i.e. things like dairy and eggs, you don't have a lot of options. Well, you do technically, but realistically, for most of us within our means to acquire the things that you would need to produce it, you don't have a lot of options. No. You're pretty limited. In an ideal world, there's lots more. I mean, there's some pretty big homesteading channels that have milked some pretty unusual animals that in other parts of the world is quite normal, but here, because they're not common, the investment that it would have taken to make that a reality, let alone keep it going. Reality. Exactly, let alone keep it going is kind of the question.
It's not like there's people selling camels down the road.
But it goes back to the thing, right? the overhead cost to keep something going, if it's readily available, i.e., I'm going to pick on the dairy cow, right? Jerseys are common, for example, the classic dairy cow. Buying one from a farm and getting the AI will get you the product. It's debatable whether it's quote unquote sustainable because you're going to be 100% depending on that industry to do it. Mm-hmm. That's kind of where I'm going with it, right?
Yeah.
But to get the product in a simple, and easy to acquire manner, it's still worth it if that's what your goal. If the goal is worth the means, the means is worth the goal, or wherever that goes. And that's going back to that's why we're weird. We need to have these populations because, and it's probably the biologist in me going. And
it's biologist combined with the bit of the prepper side. It is like what is it?
Prepping
they call it like prepsteading or whatever. You're a homesteader, but you always have that prepping mindset to everything you do. It's a different version of a prepper. I mean, it's not.
But a lot of the times the prepping community doesn't talk about it because it's looked at as in like I've got to go and store it, not I've got to go and figure out how to continually make it renewable.
Yeah.
Which I'm going to say this from the biggest ideologies going right now. Renewable often has connotations of being sustainable because it's not it's not like oil that is a fixed resource. Renewable is you can replicate it, not with the same results all the time, but you can continually produce it. That's an excellent goal. I don't know. Hard to get to, but it's an excellent goal.
Well, and it's not achievable for everybody because we understand everybody's situations are very different. Mm-hmm. But we just happened to be where we have we bought this place with the intention that was what we wanted. We were trying to do it at our last property and didn't have enough space to do it. But hi, Diane and Samson.
Oh, I'm glad you had fun last time you were with us.
Oh, but yes. So it's. I don't think it's a doom and gloom conversation. I think it's just a reality conversation.
No, it's what do you call that? An informed decision.
Yeah. But I was going back to Red in the Valley with the. Maybe she's about to explain this here. Oh, okay. Hers started breeding early.
That's interesting because when we had ours, they were always so like.
But over Hasley's were very seasonal.
Yeah,
very seasonal. Yeah. Same thing with our sheep. We love it because we're going to put them together hopefully this weekend, but we probably won't see any action for at least another week or two because they're always end of November.
Usually. So.
Our
mic levels are different. I think it's when I get leaning back. My voice is very quiet. It doesn't carry very far. You usually have better protection.
I'm loud. It's funny because me and the kids are super loud people. I don't know why. We have a voice tone that carries. And you are like, you say something, none of us can ever hear him. Like we're always like, what? And he's like, and he gets so frustrated. He storms off because he's like, what?
Yeah. I can't really yell. That's the thing. It just doesn't. It's got to be the tone. I don't know what it is.
I don't know. I've heard some. Well, actually, no. You grumble when you get cranky. You grumble.
It doesn't come out audible.
No, not at all. It's just like. Oh, did you see that facial expression? That was horrible. And that's for the world to see. Lean back, boss voice. Yeah.
Well, I will try to do better. We should get a mic at some point, like a proper one, because that would probably help.
Yeah. Well, and I also lean forward. You don't.
Yeah, I have a bad habit of not.
Well, it's because my chair rolls. If I don't sit this way, as soon as I lean back, I go this way. And I go that way. So I have to sit at a certain point, which probably puts me, angled in. Either that or I don't know where your microphone is on the computer.
I think it's on the camera, right?
Oh, okay.
The camera takes over. So I don't know how good the camera is. But.
See, I told you we should have got the better mic that had the one that had the mic on both sides.
It's technology.
Yeah, but...
Caitlin's family is asking about worming. Well, to kind of put it in a nutshell, I don't know. The Icelandics that's their one, like, kryptonite. That's the one.
Worms.
This is the worms. You can manage it.
She's camouflaged back there, see? You barely see her. But she's cute.
Yeah, she's got herself comfortable in the box.
Yeah.
What was I saying?
We're talking about worming.
Oh, yeah. So we don't tend to follow like a schedule for it because we don't want to build up a worm resistance.
Yeah.
But at the same time, right now we do worm. We're working on the pasture rotation stuff to help with that, and it has helped this year a lot. But we do basically do like the Comanche stuff where you look at the eyes and
checking body condition. Basically, our regime, and we might experiment with something this year. We're going to try it, but our regime is we don't worm except for right after lambing. They, as soon as they drop their all our sheep are in one pasture at lambing, and as soon as they drop their babies, they move to the stall in the barn to bond, or they move to the other pen. Depends on how well the mom bonds at the time. But at that point, we worm the mums with a fenbenzyl wormer, like Safeguard, something like that. That's kind of the recommended. Now, we only do it once a year on most of them, unless we see.
And the whole point of that is because that's the time when basically once they have the lamb, that it's kind of like dogs. And most animals that have internal worms, they all kind of do the same thing. The hormone's a trigger for them to go into overdrive, produce and start
Yeah, then the
producing.
worms really come out right after they land.
Yeah,
They're kidded.
they're cute.
It's the same with the goats. When we had the goats, we had the same thing. As soon as the babies dropped, it was a worming. But otherwise, we really just monitor the herd. And we only worm if someone needs it. Like this year, our little orphan Annie, she ended up with the barber pole worm very badly, got bottle jaw. And that was even after we had wormed her. We had watched her and wormed her. Anyway, so she was one that we ended up with. I believe she got 3 doses, and then we ended up switching to Quest after doing some research to make sure that we had killed it, because Quest is quite powerful. You have to be more careful with that. It's actually not.
It's a withdrawal time.
Yeah.
But
anyway, she came out of it just fine. But that's the thing. We don't we just check, and our adults use. We didn't worm anybody this year other than at their.
And we do. We do use like the apple cider vinegar and that sort of stuff. And one thing we do find with the Icelandics, I will say this, they do have definitely not experts in other kinds of sheep, because as far as we understand, the Icelandics are a little bit different. They do have a mechanism where they will just kind of stop eating the pasture, and it'll actually start to grow again.
And they still won't eat it.
They won't touch it. Now, the lambs, not so much. It's like they haven't learned it yet. But this year, with our pasture rotation, we found the adults, which once they're not growing, they usually are better at dealing with it to begin with. But our adults really didn't have any issues this year, which was great. That, you're kind of moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I will say rotation or extremely clean
stalls.
Facilities,
bringing them into a stall at night that you're cleaning all the time and keeping your pasture rotation. You could probably get away. You should still check, but odds are you probably wouldn't have to worm. Other than I would still do it right after lambing or kidding. That's just for us. As much as we want to try and push for the natural, and there's lots that you can do with that throughout the rest of the year, but for us,
this is a perfect time too to go back to the whole discussion of sustainable, right? Because one thing that I think a lot of homesteaders don't think about is also going back to the discussion. If you're raising something for meat, milk, or eggs, you have to breed it. Well, if you're breeding, as much as a lot of the times you'll hear homesteaders say, well, I'm not a breeder, I'm not a whatever, it's just for me, it doesn't matter. It does. Selection still matters, because this worm resistance, if you don't select, you're not getting worm resistance.
Yeah.
It doesn't just happen, right? You're going to have to make breeding decisions and culling decisions and all these other things based on it. And to do that, this goes back to the population size. You can't do it with one animal. You can't do it with 2 animals. This is why we have this kind of weirdness of these populations.
We have an obsession with being like
you need more to select from, basically.
Yeah, we like to select the best of the best.
That's a bigger discussion itself.
Having more allows you to improve your herd, your flock, everything.
And more allows you to going back to the pigs. It's something we couldn't do.
No.
We wouldn't be able to do that. So
yeah.
We will definitely look into that on the mic stuff. We've looked into it a little bit of the groups, but not as much as we should.
Yeah.
Hey, we're doing pretty good. Hopefully everybody's finding the picture not bad. We did buy a new webcam. We hadn't had one.
Oh, yeah.
So we've come up a little bit, but technology is not our forte.
Mm-hmm. No, we kind of just coast along. It's like my drone. For over a year now, I've been saying I want a drone.
I'm going to
no, but that sounds like a great project for the kids, Miles.
Well, now that being said, we did look for, and this is a worm that doesn't affect the sheep as much, but they do get tapeworms because there's different. There's different kinds of worms, right? And well, you don't have to do a fecal float necessarily to see that, but that was something we did notice. And this is something too about knowing, because all livestock are different, and it's kind of knowing some of those signs. If you're getting basically the best way to put it is, if they're in good shape, the tapeworm doesn't really reduce your animal's productivity, right? They can kind of deal with it because it's not sucking like the barber pole worm, which is the worst for sheep of any kind. It pretty much, I think some of them have a bit of resistance, but it's pretty much the universal nasty sheep parasite. It's actually sucking blood out of their innards, which is usually what causes. That's why the phylactery works, because you're seeing anemia, right? By the time you're seeing anemia, you've got a pretty good infestation. Most of the other worms are sucking the nutrients out.
So as long as they're fed well, it doesn't necessarily affect them.
Potentially, right? But that also depends on your management and stuff too, right? If you're doing a lot of pasture rotation and stuff, and you've got your cycles. But where I was going with that is, we've never actually done the fecal floats per se. Probably something to look into in the future. I guess we've been very focused, and this is the other part too, right? It's the infrastructure. To do pasture rotation with anything, you need space and fencing. Well, we have the space. We don't have all the fencing.
The fencing's not quite there yet.
And that's the part that takes a lot of time.
Each year we do a couple more pastures.
Yep, we're like a lot further ahead than we were. So
yeah, just because I'm going to come back to Eldan's there, but I'm just going to touch on Diane and Samson. We do keep chickens in with our sheep, and they decimate. They go through. If they see anything, they're picking it out of the manure, everything. And like now the one thing they'll eat all that worms, but we don't put them back to the pasture. So that's where the pasture rotation comes in handy. But the chickens are free range in the sheep nighttime pen.
Another advantage, and this is again kind of that whole planning,
and it works amazing,
is one thing we notice with the sheep and the chicken combination, and it does depend on the sheep because they don't all let them do it, but a lot of our rams are very big on this. The sheep will let the chickens pick like the kids out of them.
Yeah.
Basically, I don't think you can actually completely get rid of the kids. Our sheep don't have a lot of them, but then at the same time, when they come into the spaces where the chickens are, the chickens decimate them. It's actually quite interesting.
Hey, Harvey Black.
Hello.
So going back to the tracking the parentage by name, we used to, and
we do.
Well, like we used to kind of work in lines where like we had Lila, and then all her offspring were named human names or something like that, and then we had Coco, and all her offspring were named colors or chocolates or that sort of stuff. But it's had a little bit of a bleed over now because as we've gone through years of breeding, the lines have crossed, I guess you could say, in some ways. And so it's kind of one of those now. It's a good thing that they're registered and we have the pedigrees so that we can figure it out.
Well, yeah, and that's a whole other discussion about registrations and stuff. But yeah, it's good. It's good to keep track of that stuff, like especially when you're talking. The advantage of these animals that don't produce a lot of offspring is you're not overrun, and you still get lots of product from them. But the downside is they don't have a lot of offspring. So if you don't get yourself to the point that you're kind of self-sufficient-ish, you're constantly going looking, and that's where having registered stock is nice, because then you can actually look and say, hey, these ones that are for sale aren't very related to mine, so that's actually a good match. Mm-hmm. As opposed to, we were talking to the fellow that we bought our last two rams from, and we had done exactly that. We looked and went, whoa, these are not related at all. This is kind of a nice opportunity. He actually told us a story where he had spent quite a bit of money to
how far did he bring it
from Alberta. He shipped in cows from Alberta to his herd. He had a beef herd, pretty sizable beef herd. He shipped them in, and it turned out when he actually got the pedigrees, they were like direct sons of some cows that he'd shipped back out there. So he spent all this money because he didn't look at the parentage. Now they were registered, so kind of silly move, but
he just assumed because they were far away.
If it's not registered and doesn't come with that paperwork, you don't really know unless you're crossbreeding. That's obviously, well, if I'm crossing a Holstein to a Jersey, it's not related. Yeah. But that's another discussion too.
I was going to just scroll back up there. Sorry. Red in the Valley made a good point there. I think it was addressing somebody else's, but clean feed, water, rotating pastures, all very important. And that's exactly it. Clean your feed dishes, because guess what? They crap in them. Or we say poop around
Well,
here.
and that does go back to, too, the whole thing of like the within your means, right? Because when you have the allure of, I could make some extra money with it, that's, once you start to go down that side, and I don't say this in a bad way, but there's always that incentive there. Exactly like I think Scott's one thing's about selling the dead cow. That dead cow's worth money, even though it's dead. I still make money with it, and there's that same little niggling thing in the back of your head going to happen where once you scale up from just homestead scale to business scale, where it's like put 2 more cows in there, or this year I grew 6 pigs. If I grow 8 next year, I can make that much more money. And yes, but you also have the other cost of it, and the big one is just that. It's the more animals you have, unlike plants. Plants are different. The more animals you have, the harder it is to keep things clean and keep rotating and not recontaminate and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Our chickens do go under the fences. I shouldn't say under the fences. It depends.
Through the fences.
Well, it all depends on the opening size. And we try to, where the chickens are, we try to keep it, what is it, like 4x4 is the biggest?
Oh, no, but she's talking about letting them going out with the sheep.
Yeah, but our sheep are fenced in. See, where we are, we fence pretty good because we don't want to lose sheep to coyotes.
Yeah. But with we actually have coops that open into the sheep paddock.
Yeah.
So every day we go open the flap and the chickens come out into the paddock.
And for the most part, we find the chickens, because we've got different genetic groups in different coops basically that open into different areas. And they only go so far from the coops. That's the one thing, and that's directly related to your size too. If you're on a very small property, it's harder because it's easier for them to go outside the bounds of your property. If you're on a real big property, there's probably chicken's probably not working the whole thing.
Yeah. Now saying that, we have like 40 chickens, so they're working it pretty good.
You said, do they ever let the downfall to goats here?
I think it's about the coyotes.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Chickens. Yeah, that's a good point from around the valley. If I wouldn't drink out of it, then they won't either. You find they're a lot more particular given the choice.
Girls got into the milk room.
Uh-oh, so it's a mess. Yeah, that sort of stuff happens.
Yeah. We've got a goose that keeps going under the door of his stall, and we should just drop the door down. We know this.
We have to do that.
But we just haven't gotten time to do it, and every morning stuff is everywhere in the barn because this silly goose goes out and makes a mess.
I'm going to go back up just to make sure I didn't miss too much. We kind of got behind, and then just going back up here. I think it's pretty good. I think we're caught up. I'm not doing too bad tonight.
Yeah, we're staying with it. We're staying with it.
I'm not doing too bad tonight.
But
I don't know. I keep going back to the original discussion, but I do think there is some merit to the plant side of a homestead. Never as what do you call that? Never as exciting.
Glamorous.
Well, the animals are the fun part, right? Because you get to interact with them and all that sort of stuff. And
what? You don't talk to your plants?
But the plants are never as exciting. But I think if you're really trying to keep it sort of homestead self-sufficient scale, notwithstanding that there's nothing wrong with trying to grow something into a business, but if you're trying to keep it that scale, you probably really want to think about what you have and why you have them and all that sort of stuff before you bring them onto the homestead. So hopefully, said things change all the time, but I think it's not saying that, well, if we change the rules on selling milk, then that might change the paradigm.
I'd be very curious to see if there will be any changes, but I think, like what he said about the dead cow, that you do run such a big risk on that with you know, people, I'm going to say, taking advantage. You know, it's not rules. What do you call that? It's been set there for a reason because
if they ever do do it, there'll be a whole set of other rules that come along with it. It's pretty much a given. But again, not complaining about that.
no. Well, it's not our plan to do that sort of thing. It does allow a little more flexibility on some things, which is nice.
Well, that was the other thing too, to go back to the pig thing, because we didn't really excuse me, let's steal some of your water. We didn't completely touch on it, but the other part with it was, and we've brainstormed, we've looked at things that we could grow, scale up, this, that, whatever. And no matter how we look at it, there's no way, and you kind of know it going into it, so I'll put that disclaimer out there, but there's no way in the climate that we live in, because of the shorter growing season. If we lived somewhere that had a longer growing season, the coonies are good because they do use pasture pretty well without destroying it. Problem is, and we're in southern Canada, the problem is
it's such a short
you're
season.
like, what, May,
Well,
June,
May,
July.
you wouldn't put them out when it was wet, so you'd be.
Well, May you usually can.
Yeah, I guess
April
May.
You can't. So
yeah.
you'd be lucky. So you'd be May, June, July, August, September. So you're 5 months of the year that they can really get the most out of the pasture. Once you get past that, like you just said, once it gets wet and once the pasture stops growing, they go, and you can supplement, and this is a whole nother discussion. There's some other really good YouTube discussions on, but they start rooting, not deep, but they do, looking for minerals and nutrients that are stored in the roots. And it just, yeah, it's not all rain, sunshine and rainbows, I guess is the best way to put it. So it's that fact that you are still dependent for a substantial portion of their diet on prepared or bought foods, even if you're doing it pastured. So I'm going to say it this way: it's almost easier to say we're just not going to eat a lot of pork or any pork potentially going forward, very little, than it is to try to figure out, because we can grow a substantial portion of our meat.
The what Caitlin's Family Farmstead saying there about the milk going up. I mean, we've already been seeing. I mean, butter has just gone absolutely crazy. That's something that's just
butter's been going up though.
But even I went and bought milk at Superstore yesterday. No, I don't know, whatever day it was that I went and bought milk. And usually you can get it for $3.99 for 4 liters, and it was $4.69, and that was normal. So it's taken a 70-cent jump, and to be honest, I hadn't noticed it. Maybe it's been gradual, but I really hadn't noticed it until I started looking, because they were talking about North Shore Preparedness's live about the prices of things, and then I started to actually look, because there's not a lot that we buy, but milk was one of them, and I just kind of grab it and put it. Vegetable oil. Holy cow! Because we stockpile that sort of stuff: olive oil, vegetable oil, all that kind of thing. And yes, it'd be nice to be using lard and things like that, but at the same time, I'd be buying that right now too. So
I'm gonna go to Diane and Samson's comment that kind of goes to Harvey Black's about the oatmeal and the milk one too. This is an opinion, but because it can.
Yeah.
And this is the other part too about the homesteading, right? When you don't produce it yourself, you either don't eat it. I'm just talking food. You either don't eat it or you buy it. And if most people can't produce it and they have to buy it.
Well, and the thing is, as things start to climb, they're never going back down, because as soon as people get adjusted to paying the price, I mean, that's the price. And why would you put it down just because you don't want to be? No businessman's a nice guy, really.
Yeah, and like Caitlin's saying, and this is the other thing about trying to do the business side of it. And again, I'm not knocking that, but you're kind of stuck, right? You're getting what you're given, because you're stuck in that system that you're whatever it is that you're farming at that scale, whether it's cash crops or beef or pork or chicken or milk or whatever it is, you're basically stuck. Like, you can't consume it all yourself, so you've either spent all that money
Yeah.
as a business to grow it, and you're going to either end up wasting it or you're taking what they're going to give you.
That's sort of what she's saying there about the farmers aren't seeing it though.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be.
Well, and this is the other thing. I didn't touch on poultry, but it's like at a homestead scale, if you want to produce, obviously you can't produce milk, but if I was to, having been in this as long as we have been, tried as many things as we have, stopped doing as many things as we have for various reasons, if somebody was to walk up and be like, how would you start a homestead? I'd basically say, and again, homestead scale, you pick one big mammal. Doesn't really matter what it is because it all depends on your resources. Could be cows, if you've got enough resources for that. Could be goats or sheep or pigs. It doesn't really matter because you can always make it work. But you're one big mammal, and then poultry are a great secondary because they do really well living underfoot and using, like you say with the chickens, using things that would otherwise be complete waste.
And touching in here on like what Harvey's saying with the stock up on seeds and grow them. Don't just store them because that is one thing we see time and time again. People saving seeds, but they don't know how to grow them. And it takes practice. You will fail the first year.
You can have, and I mean, you said it, Harvey, because you said growing the victory garden. So I know you're already thinking it, but you can have the biggest seed store in the planet, and if you don't know how to grow and propagate that stuff, it will expire. It's worthless. It's basically worthless because you'll plant it and they'll all die, or you'll plant it and you won't know how to save them again, right? Like it goes into that grandeur of things, right? A tomato is not a very grand thing. In fact, most people don't care about them at all. But yeah, it's like knowing how to propagate that and grow it. Although it's not that hard, you still have to know how to do it, or it's not. It doesn't matter how well. I suppose if you had billions of seeds, but you still have a shelf life.
Yeah. Well, but you got to be able to replenish those seeds, which means they have to grow well. You need to know how to do all that.
Which is the same thing as the discussion we've been having with the animals, right? It's selection
and
knowing
the other
how
thing,
to get them to propagate.
And that ties right into our discussion on the animals in the sense of, from a prepping mindset, you need to be able to financially do it. You need to be like, we have debt that we need to pay, and it just all goes hand in hand with figuring out your books, know what you're spending, and make sure that you're not going over, homesteading within your means. It's a big topic. It's got a huge umbrella, but it is so important to make sure that you are working at being sustainable within your means. It may not mean that you can do everything, but pick those things that you think you can do and focus on them and do them well, because at the end of the day, if you're doing something well, you have something of value, and that thing of value is tradable.
If nothing else, you have something of value to yourself because you can keep perpetually doing it.
This is getting serious. This is
it's important because I don't know. I'm going to come back to this. That's interesting.
Red Valley,
about the oil wells. I did know that there was a big push to cap some of the ones that weren't usable anymore. But if they're capping other stuff, that's interesting. And yeah, I think the seed to maintain because you figure out. It's a good point. And you are right. You don't want to have. It's always that balance of not having too much surplus. You're 100% right. But it's not just as much as like, I'm going to pick on the chicken example. One rooster and 25 hens. Depending on the breed, he may not get around to them all. But in theory, that one rooster can produce babies with them all. But then, what happens the next year? Suddenly, you had one rooster. That's 50% of your flock, right? Because all the babies from him. So now you need a new rooster. Which there's different theories on that. But if you're selecting for specific, you want to have to go and find a new one. That's pretty good about the ones from the supermarket.
Mm-hmm.
You can definitely do it. It's just then becomes, I'm not going to go into the pepper stuff because peppers are bad for cross pollinating, but you can do there's all sorts of things you can do to get the genetic stuff in the first place, and that's totally one of them. We've done it with certain things, but
yeah, this oil well thing sounds kind of crazy, but
yeah, a little bit. I think you are right. Is like, I don't know where I was going to go, and I wanted to go back because there was a couple comments I wanted to talk about. But for I'm going to say me, but us, because I'm the one saying it. But I think you kind of think a lot of it too. It's like we didn't necessarily start homesteading, growing food as a prepping mentality. Like, I'll be completely honest, when I started it, it was totally looking at the price of squash in the grocery store and going, I know how much it costs to do that.
Why would I pay?
Pretty much nothing.
Yeah.
So why would I not just do that and have a food item that I can store? And of course, it snowballs. Again, this is me being the biologist, but it's like, I'm going to go on a squash tangent for a moment. It snowballs to that thing of, it costs you nothing to grow squash. So you buy the seeds once, and hypothetically you can keep it going forever. However, there's a caveat to that. You can only grow, most of us can only grow one variety of one of the 4 species that have basically been domesticated without them crossing. And when squash cross, you often do get things that are not really edible because they've been selected, even though it's the same genetic species. They're a perfect example of there's something that has been isolated and selected for such a different purpose, i.e. zucchini and some pumpkins. And, these are things that are all the same species, but they have completely different production qualities. So when they cross, they're a great example of you just kind of get gourds in some people's mind, right? It's not really edible. But if you spent, and we want to do a video on this actually, if you spent, what's a pack of seeds cost? It's a high end. Let's say you bought a $4 pack of seeds. If you
that should be our project for next year.
If you have the discipline at the front end and go, all right, I can have these, I can have four types of squash. I buy 4 packages of seeds as long as they're from 4 different species and they all have a purpose for us, kind of like how we've got with our stuff. I spend nothing for the rest of my life, and I grow
how many pounds? That's the
hundreds
question.
Of pounds of food.
So this will be a next year's season project. Is we're going to do a separate garden for the 4 packs of squash seeds because Chris is not going to be happy to only grow a single pack of each species. So we're going to grow extras in a different spot.
The problem is we've already got some of them, so we're not getting new seeds.
No, but you're going to weigh those seeds. Mm-hmm. You weigh them by however much comes in a pack, and you only plant in the one garden whatever you would get in 4 packs of seeds. And we will do a video documenting how many pounds those 4 seeds will create and the fact that you never have to buy them again.
But the squash is such a simple example of why the population dynamic stuff matters, because it's easy to do. You don't have to have exponential space because not everybody grows squash. But even if you have a small area, as long as your neighbors aren't growing it, you can still do it and keep it going forever. And you've spent, what's 4 times 8? Or 4 times 4?
16.
You spent $16. And you're growing literally hundreds of pounds of food every year. There's other stuff to it, but
Angie was talking about a collab idea on this topic, so maybe we'll have to discuss.
Well, I think it's a good idea because it's almost taking homesteading. You hear about it all the time with like preppers saying homesteading and prepping is the same, but then you go into not all of them, but then you go into a live where it's mostly preppers and stuff, and like nobody wants to talk about growing tomatoes or learn how to do any of these basic skills. Yet it's like that's the fundamentals of it. This is all stuff that's within the realm that most of us could do. Could we all have a herd of cows? No, no, we can't. But it's all a relative to scale to your resources, right? If you have enough resources for a herd of cattle, it's the same it's the same things over and over again with slightly different flavors. But
I was going on to Eldan. She'd asked about if we tried making fuel. No, never tried that. I'd be interested to. Well, it'd be interesting. I think you can do it with manure, can't you?
There's biodiesel and stuff.
But I mean,
energy's the hard one, right? And this is another thing.
We just use the horse.
Well, eventually that there is a whole thing about that. Yeah, in ethanol conversion, there are things you can definitely do. I'm going to say this, and it's not super popular, but if you're actually doing it on a homestead scale, reducing your mechanization is probably the best thing you can do. We were talking about that. It's like even gardens. It's like a tiller. We sold our tractor. Great example. And that to some people may not be a great idea because it's like you can do so much with the tractor, but you have to ask yourself, can you actually achieve the same goals? Your time frame is going to be longer. It's like we talk about this with pasture. We could rent a bulldozer and flatten the back 10 acres and then buy all the seed we need, or rent a tractor, or hire somebody to come in with a tractor and a cultivator to plant it as a hayfield. And in like 2 or 3 years, we'd have a hayfield, right? But that's a lot of money outlay and energy that goes into a short-term project. Has long-term benefits. I'm of the mindset of it's a symptom of bigger problems because people's mindset go to that. I can do it real quick with the machinery. That bulldozer and that tractor are how many horsepower? And then you have to ask yourself again, do I actually need it? Because it's like when we look at our herd of sheep, that's why we got rid of the cows. To have the cows, to even take the cows to a level that really wouldn't have been sustainable,
you had to have a lot.
You had to have a lot of hay. To have the herd of sheep, you still have to have a lot of hay.
And really
compared
nice
to, say, a herd of rabbits, it doesn't need as much. But you don't need as much.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's the question, is it better spent as pasture land than hayfield? Like, it's still not sustainable because we would still have to purchase hay, but you can potentially extend your grazing period by having more pasture. More expensive, right? So,
well, we've talked about from a prepping perspective and from the homestead that right now the only thing that we will not have is draft power.
And that's on the discussion table too, and that's also, it doesn't tie directly into the pigs, but it kind of is there because when you have a horse, you can ride him. That's all you can do.
I mean, and he's 27 years old, so you're probably not getting to a very far away town.
He's kind of like Red in the Valley, because I did see your comment about your horse. He's kind of the same thing. He's kind of getting to the end of his life, and it's sort of, he's just living out his days.
He's happily retired. He runs around every now and then, but pretty much that's it. He doesn't do much. But the conversation has come up about some form of draft, whether it was donkey or mule or something, but it would be purely, I'm going to say it, a luxury item in the sense that in the old days, I mean, people didn't breed horses left, right, and center. I mean, you purchased your horse from or traded your horse from somebody.
Well, and this is another thing too that goes back to not everybody. How do I put this? If you read history books,
Thank you for coming in, Sweeney.
Yeah, thank you. If you read history books, I'm going to come back to the conversation about all the fuel stuff because I think it's excellent. But if you read history books, what are you going to read about? From a livestock perspective.
Comment about you just glowing. You're just like, ooh,
that's the light shining on my forehead. But if you read history books, what are you going to read about? You're going to read about you're going to read about like this breed of horse that was developed in this area and kept by this noble person, or the war horses of Northern Europe, or the whatever. Like if you go on the internet and start looking at breeds, there's a lot of information. And I'm not dissing horses by any means right now. All I'm saying is there's a lot of prestige that comes with horses. The reason, and cattle are the same way to a degree, although it's a little different. But the reason is, throughout history, poor people couldn't have them. You couldn't afford it. You couldn't afford to purchase it, and you couldn't afford to feed it. And that's where it's like a lot of the livestock that are best. I'm a big proponent of it.
So he wants to get a pony.
Well, but you don't see it now because from a you don't see it now because they're not prestigious. But a pony or a donkey, I'm going to say it this way: go to a country where people still live these very is it pastoral? What they call it when you're basically farming.
Maybe,
pastoral.
yeah.
I think that's the term. I may have that term wrong, but you.
Chris riding on a luxury donkey.
There is
job, Miles.
There is some truth to it because
I can just see it. Chris on his donkey. There's a movie that happens. Somebody, what's the one where they're up in the maze and he's riding the donkey backwards? He's getting shot.
Oh, I don't know.
There's a movie. It's something like that. Anyways, sorry.
But it's
we're taking you off your mission here. Hi Mal, how are you? Go for it. Sorry. Zip it. No more bugging Chris.
Well, where I was going with it, and I'm going to say, because I think Red in the Valley talked about the Clydesdale was right. I totally agree with you. And then this is the double-edged sword because draft just doesn't happen. Anybody who thinks it's like, oh, if a crisis comes, I'm just going to buy a horse and I'm good, is a total have their head in the clouds because there's a whole skill set to it. I don't have that skill set. I can tell you how to make chickens go broody and produce chickens, but I can't tell you how to do draft or how to work with horses. You know more about it from your background, but you don't know everything either, right? So you say luxury item, but part of it would be it's like a prep in a way because you've got to learn it. Like you can't just wake up and suddenly there's no gas, so we're going to go out and get a horse. It doesn't work that way. But at the same time, I guess the point that I was kind of getting at with the horsepower was I like the big draft horses.
Thanks for coming in, Diana Sampson.
Yes, thank you. I like the big draft horses, but they are kind of a recent history of changeover to the agricultural practices, right? As sort of modern agriculture was taking place in, I'm going to say North America, but it was happening in Europe too. The more cows you had, the more hay you had to do, the more cultivation you had to do. Suddenly, those big horses made a lot of sense. No different than they were traditionally more for pulling heavy loads when you were taking things to centralized towns and things, right? So their purpose has sort of changed slightly over time. But your commoner, I'll put it, wouldn't have had those horses. Unless they had a really, really good reason for them, i.e. they were merchants.
I don't plan on being a commoner. That is the overall thing. I don't plan to be a commoner.
Well, whether you plan on it or not, we basically
are commoners. Yes, we're peasants. But the thing would be to have something horse-wise that's multi-purpose. Like we look at Bucky now, he's 27. Obviously, he's not going to be pulling anything or plowing a field. But he's a quarter horse. But he is built that in his day he could have done the job if he'd been trained. And I think that's one of the things is just kind of picking something that
it's also
can do the job but doesn't overpower the.
Bigger is not necessarily better.
Yeah,
is kind of the thought, right?
Because for us, we have no need to be plowing big fields and doing that sort of stuff. But for people that do, that's why big draft got developed, and those people are welcome to them. But for us on the Homestead,
and the same point too, going back to the fuel part.
You're
not a commoner.
No, I was important at some point in my past lineage. I know it.
But the same point of it going back to the fuel, right? It's like our tiller, and we do want to get away from having to till all the time because there's.
We need to stop developing new gardens.
No. But once you get the garden worked, right? It's like that.
Thanks for coming in, Ange.
It's like the thing about your garden
gets I'll watch
better.
For the email.
Yes, we will. And we'll catch
Looking
you later.
forward to it. Looking forward to the visit next week.
But the more you work your garden, the more you work in your garden, the better it should get over time, right?
Yeah. But, and we need one of those handy tools like what Quebec Homestead has.
Yes, that's where I was kind of going with it. But for your initial, when you're talking about yes, there are ways to start it from no-till, but at the same time, we have the tiller, we have the access to the gas. We're going to use
Take
it
advantage of it
while
while
we
you
have
have
it.
it. Yeah.
But the tiller was a far step down from the tractor
Mhm.
as far as cost and maintenance and all that sort of stuff. So I do
Mhm.
think there is some merit to,
Yeah.
you know, going the opposite way, having less technology.
So yeah, LDEMs is do the no-till, and that's what I would do with the what's the thing called that Mal has?
Broad fork.
Broad fork. You know, where you can get down and you can loosen it up, because that's our problem. Everything here is so packed. You need to be able to loosen it up and kind of get some sort of,
It's like where we planted the potatoes this year. We did till it because it was like a hard pan. I don't think we would have ever got a broad fork into it.
No.
And it's still got hard pan, and it's probably going to have hard pan for the entire time we live here. But working it up that little bit, and then we mulched it, and we probably will till it again because the hard pan still hasn't completely broke up. The potatoes helped because it was amazing to go from the spring where we tilled it, but it didn't do a whole lot. Putting the potatoes in, so we basically were able to just get the potatoes in, kind of what happened. They did pretty well, actually.
We mulched them, right?
And then we mulched them, right? So the mulch, it's not proper no-till because we did till, but we took an area that had been compacted, and it's a slow process is kind of where I'm going with it. So the areas that we have, because of the historic use of the property, the horses. I'm going to say it.
The horses.
She had 20 horses.
Yeah, so it was packed ground.
So the area that are closest to the house where we would basically most like to put a lot of the garden stuff, unless we do raised beds, that changes the dynamic. We've got to do something. And I don't know, maybe there is a no-till solution, but it doesn't seem to be destroying the quality at this point in time. And the plants really help. It's amazing how much they help.
Well, look at the sweet potatoes, how deep they went, and that loosened everything.
Yeah. And that's another part that's really great about annual vegetables, right? Because annual vegetables are 100% adapted for taking advantage of disturbance. That's why, to a degree, that's why there's that mindset of, well, you've got to plow and disc and all this other stuff, because they're annual, they need the disturbance, right? They don't tend to persist in an environment that doesn't have the disturbance, or they don't persist well. Yeah. It's not like a sod grass, right? That once it performs its sod, or a forest of trees, once it's there until you have a real substantial disturbance. I'm going to go back a bit. Well, that's interesting, converting that small Honda to wood gas. I haven't looked into wood gas too much. Like one thing we were talking about today was actually for heating, we do use in the winter, we have a wood stove, right? And we can definitely improve on some insulation stuff, which isn't a fun thing to talk about, but it's true. But at the same time, the nice part about it is, and the way that we're using the property in that, is we actually could probably, I think, harvest most of what we would need from the property. Are we going to take advantage of potentially buying some at this point in time while we're setting up other stuff? Absolutely. But, I don't know, it still is a little more renewable in some ways, at least where we are.
Yeah.
It's not renewable for everybody everywhere at all, and it's not scalable for everybody everywhere though either.
No.
Oh, not a problem.
Yes, no worries.
Definitely catch you later. Thank you very much for coming in. Sorry, you kind of came right into the middle of a pretty deep conversation, I guess. But
I think most of this one's been pretty deep conversation, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, the hard pan. That's the issue.
Yeah, and it's totally just because, like we say, because of our water source being basically in the barn, for some things, we may develop some stuff further out, but it's kind of nice to have, it's like that permaculture design, right? You're kind of spoking everything out. So
from our water.
Well, and by the time we get to, we've never actually done an overview of our property. We've kind of explained it.
That's because I don't have a drone.
Yeah, we got to figure something out for that. But
I need a drone.
We've never done that overview, but the way our property is set up, it's kind of a weird shape. So
tell them I need a drone.
You need a drone.
Everybody wants to see what our view is.
But what was I saying?
Maybe for Christmas I'll get a drone. Wink, wink.
Maybe we'll
I don't
see.
wink well.
Turn pigs into drones.
There you go.
But yeah, it's kind of a weird shape. So we've kind of got it scoped out that the pasture stuff, which of course would be like your less intensely managed parts of your permaculture setup. We haven't gotten into permaculture here yet, but despite the fact that we probably don't look like it, we do subscribe to some of it and try to mimic some of it.
Well, we kind of pull bits from a lot of different methods and then make our own method.
Combine them.
Yeah.
But it's like our manure hugelculture beds. Most people will be like, "What?" And it's like, you want to feed chickens for nothing. Make a manure hugelculture bed.
Yeah,
you've
they'll
got
just work
some branches and stuff around that you don't use. You'll totally use that. But where's I going with it? Yeah, so we've got things sort of scoped out. So the pastures are further back, and for a lot of this stuff, we don't really want to be growing it back there because we don't have as much control over that area.
Well, and I'm not lugging water back there.
No,
we don't want to
water.
put fences around it to keep deer out of it and everything else.
So that's kind of why we're a bit stuck with the hard panny type areas around the house. Not that they're all that way, but some of it is.
Yeah.
Okay, I will admit I am not mechanically inclined. So that, although that sounds relatively straightforward, it'd be interesting to look into it for sure.
Well, it may be something that's worth learning enough to be able to do it because
I think
you never know.
The hard part too is the difference between like when we're talking about the draft and the horses and the donkeys. It's all relative, right? Because you have your horsepower and what that's derived from. But then I'm going to pick on like the race horses, for example, right? And then the endurance horses that can go long distances and cover a lot of area in a day, right? Versus a pony or a donkey that can't do that. And that's one thing that's hard about modern homesteading, but also just the way we are modern in Canada. I'm going to say Canada and keep it to that. The U.S. is the same. Everybody travels. Everybody travels a lot. And it's only been recently that people don't travel much.
Well, but we'd have the dilemma. Look at our nearest feed store.
Yeah, you couldn't get there on a horse.
38 kilometers or miles.
Yeah, so you're not getting there in a day on a horse.
No.
With a wagon.
No. Like that's a 3-day, 4-day affair with a wagon.
Yeah. It's
so kind of in a pinch, you're not going.
Yeah. So
our nearest town is, well, we kind of live in a hamlet, but there's no stores, no nothing there. You do have neighbors. We probably have, within a mile of us, there's probably 20 houses.
Okay.
But so you hope that you're going to eventually have maybe a community or something that develops if it ever needed. But our nearest town would be about 3 miles away, which Bucky could make it there.
Yeah.
In a crisis, Bucky could get there and back.
He could make it there and back again, a horse's tail.
Yeah.
Hobbit reference. Chrissy, you're going to have to tell us if there's anything that you would like, because you were extremely nice in sending us that. I mean, you sent us more than just horseradish, but we'll have to take a video. Maybe we'll take that, because
you better take it soon.
Well, I know, but Cindy might be gone too. But we'll do it with her, and we're going to show you what it looks like. Now you'll have to excuse the fact
somebody let his geese in there.
Well, the geese are chewing on it a little.
Who would have thought the geese would eat horseradish?
Apparently they like
but it did. It's doing amazing.
Yes, so
amazing.
You need to tell us what you would like, because we're more than happy to send seeds or whatever your way. That's completely, we would love to do that. The one thing, I guess, and there's a very small group of us in here, and most of us talk about this all the time, we have no problem sending seeds and whatnot to anybody. I guess what we don't like doing is sending people stuff that they don't.
Yeah, we'd rather be sending stuff that people actually want to use. Mm-hmm. So,
and we have a bit of a list, and we know a few things that a few people would like to get. So yeah, that's in their book, their mind's book.
Yeah, but we'll you know what, Chrissy, we'll either Facebook send you a little list of some stuff that we have, and if there's anything on there that strikes your fancy, then we will sort it out.
Mm-hmm.
Christmas gift. We'll do seeds for Christmas gifts. That'd be kind of fun.
Yeah, it would be. Thanks for coming in, Pastime 84.
Yeah.
I definitely appreciate it. And I think Red and Valley's got another good point, too, which goes back to this whole selection thing. Absolutely right. Like Mennonite and Amish communities and stuff, they have their own horses that, and I know they bring in stuff too,
but they breed them for most part.
Selecting horses that can do the job, right? And that's the hard part. If I don't really subscribe to there's all of a sudden going to be a big collapse and we're just going to be pushed back into the Stone Age. It's not going to happen.
No, we're going to eventually not be able to afford the food that we need.
Well, and the fuel and the travel and all the other stuff that goes along with it. But yeah, this is the problem, right? Like, that's the minority. Those horses are, for example, horses that are doing that draft and being selected for that stuff are few and far between.
Well, because most of them now are decorative. It's no different than a lot of heritage livestock. It's gone down the showing and decorative animal instead of what it actually was meant for. Mm-hmm. So it's a hard job to get things back to what they were used for originally.
Yeah. Yes. It is.
And it's like the one I'm going down a horse thing here because I absolutely love Suffolk Punch horses. Absolutely love them. And they are virtually extinct. And that is because they did not allow people to show them because they wanted to keep them in their true, what they were supposed to be meant for.
And nobody used them for anything.
Nobody used them. Nobody wanted them for that. And they went basically, like, what is there? There's like 10 breeding Suffolk Punches in Canada. Something like that. Anyways, too rare for me to get into. And of course, priced ridiculous, which makes it impossible to.
Well, and this is another thing too, that we're down to a smaller group, and I'm sure everybody in here knows this, but if I was to give advice to somebody wanting to homestead, I would say do not get into livestock with the primary purpose of trying to sell breeding animals or live animals. Using our chickens as an example, do we sell live chickens? Absolutely. Do we sell live chickens every year? Absolutely. Do we sell a lot of them? Not at all. No. We sell a very small percentage, which it helps a lot with the feed cost part of it because it just brings it down, right? Because you've generated some revenue, and it's not like we hoard the chickens or anything. It's just a case of that's not the primary purpose. The primary purpose is to feed us. So the bulk of them, if they're not good enough to become potential breeders, there's no point in selling them to somebody. But kind of like what you said, when people stop using the animal for whatever purpose or purposes, I'm going to call it this, that it evolved for, because we sometimes, I think, give ourselves as humans too much credit that we just created it, because a lot of these things were also shaped by the environment that they came from. And you can go right into molecular stuff about nutrients that they require, or like the Icelandic sheep being able to tolerate copper more than other sheep. Well, that's a direct relationship to their environment that they evolved in. I'm just going to call it that. You can call it whatever you want. They came from. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I would definitely not. And that's unfortunately what you're saying. But the Suffolk Punch is a bad example because
it's a luxury.
They're pricey because there isn't any of them.
Yeah.
Like legitimately, but it gets very hard to get out of that breeder market paradigm. Mm-hmm. Let's just put it that way, because there's always that incentive for people the high price keeps people from getting into it and getting out of it quickly, and the animals just ending up dumped, which whatever that means. In case of poultry, it usually means they went to be somebody's dinner. Yeah. In case of a horse, it might be different, but. So it protects against that, but it also creates the mindset that, hey, that's a valuable animal just because it exists. Therefore, that creates a whole nother set of problems. So my advice would definitely be don't get into it for those reasons. But that's another discussion.
You have lined up lots of other discussions tonight.
Well, it's an endless amount of topics. But on that note, we probably should end it because it is 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
Um,
We've been
but
blabbering for 2 hours.
hopefully it was interesting.
Could to be draft animals.
You know, I'm going to say this on a really, really small scale, possibly.
It'd be interesting and an experiment to try. Now, this year, I'll tell you what, Eldan, I'm experimenting this year with milking, so you experiment with turning them into a draft.
I think you could. It's no different than.
I mean, no different. People use goats. I mean, we've all seen that movie with the Michelle Pfeiffer, and she gets her little goat to pull her. She's the mean witch, and she gets her goat to pull her on her cart.
But people did for that small stuff. The only thing I would say with the sheep, because I don't know if I've ever really read much about draft sheep. It's not that they physically couldn't do it. I almost think they'd have to be bottle raised, though.
Yeah, I don't know how
because they
you
have to
get
be
them
calmer. Like they've got that. What is it? Like that fear? It's not fear response, but that jumpiness, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think because that's where I would say the goats would be superior because they don't have that.
Yeah,
they're just calmer. But hypothetically,
posing. I view you posing.
Oh, she's all pretty. She's like, "Are you guys done yet?"
Yeah. Where's my food? Where's my food? The results were inconclusive. I could see that. You know, Icelandic sheep is really hard to find information on. Like when I was even looking up the milking, there was information, but not a lot of.
You get a lot of the same information.
Yeah.
And it's not Icelandic sheep. You look up Kuni pigs. You look up Partridge Chanticleers. You look up Suffolk punch horses. You look up any of these things that aren't really the mainstream. And I don't say mainstream in a bad way, but like you want to look up Holstein cows. There's a lot of information.
The one thing that I would say that I bet, like what Chris is saying, if you had a sheep that you could lead, like a bottle lamb or something like that, like a bottle ram,
or weather, not a ram.
Okay, a wether, yes.
Ram would probably be a bad
I think
idea.
you could if you led. Like if you taught them to go with you. Like if I walk in front of my sheep with a bucket, they would pull whatever was behind them because they're following me for the bucket, and they do it in a very calm manner.
It'd be that same thing with probably the training. I, again, not an expert, but I have looked into the theory. I keep this in mind, the theory behind training various draft animals like horses, donkeys, oxen, goats, etc. I think that would be the hard part. Would be the early foundational training because like putting halters on and putting harnesses on and stuff. I don't see that being a big problem. If the sheep was very used to you and comfortable with you, and you did it from a younger age, they get used to that. It would be the same as everything else. The first time you put a load on them, or like I know for some things they do the drag training, right, where there's nothing, it's just a rope or whatever that they get used to the sound or chain or whatever. I think that would be the only hard part. But if you can get past that, I bet you, as long as it wasn't complex, like I know that's why that's the preference for horses over, well, the preference.
Thanks for hanging out with us, Scott. We're wrapping her up too, so have a great sleep, and I'm sure we will, you know, whether it's Procrastination Thursday or whatnot, I'm sure we will be seeing you.
Yes, we will catch you sooner than later.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me.
But yes, I'm curious on that. I'm going to experiment with milking this year, so I have a feeling that that's not necessary. Saying that, maybe Ross would pull. I don't know. He doesn't have the confirmation to pull. You need something with the right confirmation to do it, but we might get somebody. It could be an interesting experiment. Let's fix one this year.
Just for that purpose.
Just for that purpose, we're going to do an experiment. Yeah.
And then it'd be a question of how much can you pull. That's
I don't know. If they can pull the sleigh of wood, so I don't have to do it, then that's pretty good. Yeah. Although their little feet wouldn't do well in snow, so.
Yeah, this is where draft gets totally interesting, right? Because there's a lot of different ways you can
have a good night. Thank you for coming in.
Yeah. On that note, I think we're going to head out too, and thanks for everybody coming in.
Yeah,
and,
it's been great conversation, and a little bit of food for thought, hopefully, for people. A little bit of being in our minds for 2 hours.
I hope everybody has a good week.
Yes.
And we'll talk to everybody later.
Yeah.